Hey, Anna and the class at NYU. Sorry it took me a few days to get back to you guys, but it's kind of fun to have you guys send me some questions and then I can send you an answer, although I haven't figured out how I'm sending this answer, but I will. Okay, I wrote down your questions. Records of conferences and skill acquisition developed over time was the first question. And my goal with conferences on independent reading is to figure out, as I mentioned in the book, that idea of the reading life. And so I want to get a sense of how much are you reading, how is it going, and how do I keep you reading, that volume question. And then I can get to those skill questions. So what I typically write down in my notes, and I wish I had them with me, but I have a name, a piece of paper with the student's name on it. So then I put the date, the title of the book they're currently reading, and any notes about that. Like I might say first nonfiction, third Sarah Dessen or whatever, because I'm having this, just fill me in. How's it going? What have you been reading? And then as they're doing that, I look at their reading list in their writer's notebook to see the kinds of things like what I've missed since I last talked to them. And then the next list to see what kinds of book talks are connecting. Or do they have a next list that's broader than just the things that I'm talking about, because I hope that they're becoming readers who go other places to get books. So skill acquisition would look like this. I have a student who the first time I sat down to talk to him, luckily it was a book I'd read, and he's a student with an IEP for comprehension. And every detail he gave me, I was thinking, you are confused. So right there, you've got your basic comprehension understanding, but what kind of a difficulty is he having? I don't know. So I make that conference go longer, and we look at a section of the text together. And again, it's easy for me because I've read it, but I start asking real specific questions. Well, how do you know that? Because then I'm trying to dig into his ability to make inferences and whether or not he gets the explicit meaning that's right there in the text. If he's still not getting that, have we evaluated his reading level correctly? In this case, when I was reviewing it with him, he could answer all of the questions. So it was much more of a long-term memory thing. He had finished the book about a week before, and he just didn't remember how the parts went together. The interesting thing is he could really get the gist of the book. So the difference between understanding little particular details, like things that had appealed to me or as a very different reader, I recalled. Because you know how Louise Rosenblatt talks about the transaction that we bring ourselves to books. So as I was reading the book, I was reading things into it that Nate wasn't necessarily doing. And so when I asked him with the text in front of us, his comprehension was much better. So part of what I do with note taking is to keep track for myself of issues that have come up. And then what were the things that I tried and what did I come to understand? So when I turn the page and it's his conferring time again and I sit beside him, I'm going to ask again about comprehension. I'm going to ask again about his explicit understandings of what he's reading, even if I haven't read it, because I can easily skim a page that we're on and have that kind of conversation. Across the room, a very different kind of reader. This is a boy who he just finished today his first nonfiction book. And so my questions were about, what do you understand about the structures of this kind of text versus the fiction that you've been reading? This is a boy who hadn't read in 2.5 years. And so he had read 3 young adult fiction books very quickly, and a big victory to get him to do that. But then he moved to nonfiction, and I love it because he's reading a book about autism. His younger brother is autistic. And he was doing this, he would stop reading like about every 5 minutes. He'd go, Miss Kittle, I just figured out something else about my brother. So it was really wonderfully engaged reading, but I wanted to talk to him about the features of the text and how it was different than what he'd been doing with fiction. So I keep notes on things like that. We talked about text features, nonfiction, the title of the book. So the next time I come back, I can look at that again. So question 2, the balance. So I teach outdoor writing. I have 2 sections of that, and I have writing 2, which is advanced for seniors. And I'm also teaching in the night school, which is credit recovery or for kids who've dropped out of high school. So in all of those cases, I have a lot of freedom with what my curriculum looks like. My principal has a lot of faith in me, and we operate on an all elective model at our high school. So Students that choose outdoor writing instead of persuasive writing or research writing or just the writing one course are interested in writing about the outdoors. And so we're studying feature articles. We wrote a lot of stories about experiences in the outdoors, from hunting and fishing to skiing and hiking, ice climbing. And then they're studying the New York Times multimedia feature articles that are incredible. You may see I post some of those on Twitter, but so they're what I require for them to read varies by the class. So my writing two seniors, on Wednesday, we're given a Malcolm Gladwell article in the New Yorker to read. It's about 20 pages long, and they're bringing that in on Friday so that we can talk about text features and talk about his extended argument, because they're in the midst of writing arguments. And then outdoor writing, we're actually performing spoken word poetry tomorrow. So we've been studying spoken word poems for quite some time. Now, that means that when I say we study something, I'm almost always choose what it is we read, the immersion in that genre. I can give them places they might go to look at other pieces in that genre, but I'm choosing those for them. A whole class text. Now, I'm teaching semester courses this year, so I don't have a whole class text that we're going to read entirely as a team. Last year with full year classes, we read Outliers together. And then my students had a choice of a different nonfiction book, full-length nonfiction book that they read in Lit Circles, which I'll answer in question number 4. So it really depends on the course. We have literature-based courses that I usually choose not to teach because I know that my strength is teaching writing and independent reading. It's also my passion right now. But those teachers have the freedom to take a semester course and perhaps teach 2 whole class texts and have lots of independent reading choices, or some choose all of the texts for kids. And I tend to get those kids into my class the next year confessing to not doing a lot of reading. So I think balance is a hugely important question that you need to fight for in whatever kind of school you end up in. Because no matter how we set up a schedule for a whole class book, we are going to hold some kids back because they read faster than that, and we're going to push some kids too fast. I have students right now who have an English class, and they are 100, 150 pages behind other kids or the assigned reading that's in the class, and they're not able to keep up. So there are huge challenges with whole class text. So I just posted the other night on Twitter an interview with the girl who won a library from our Book Love Foundation. She splits it 80-20. She chooses 4 whole class books in a year-long course. So it might be interesting to go watch her interview because I think that's a pretty smart construction. Question 3, reluctant readers. What do they do with the assignments in between finding that first book? What a great question. You guys are really thinking about real kids. So I'll take Robert, for example, who at the start of the year had not read. In fact, he didn't take English last year because he said he would take it online, and then he didn't. Surprise, surprise. A kid who hates English doesn't want to go try and take it completely independently. So the start of the year, he wants to have a clean start. He wants to try, but every time he picks up a book, it doesn't interest him, engage him enough, and he doesn't have the stamina yet to, suffer through a slower pace to get to where he wants to be. I would say Robert probably started and dropped 4 or 5 books in the first 2 weeks of school, and I have them every other day. So I would see him on Monday. He'd be starting a book. By the time I got to Wednesday, he had quit reading Monday afternoon. That's not unusual. Sometimes it takes much longer. So the idea of assignments is, let's say that he comes to class in that first week and I say, in your writer's notebook today, I want you to spend 4 or 5 minutes telling me about what you're reading and how reading is going for you. He could still write, reading's not going well and he's not liking the book and this is what the book's about and why he wants to switch. He's not going to have any trouble with an assignment like that. And I certainly don't have them write about their reading every day. They need to, as Kelly Gallagher says, read 4 times what we could possibly assess to become better readers. So I have my kids reading a lot and I confer a lot, especially at the very start of the year when I've got kids who are reluctant. The ones who take much, much longer, what you find is that they give you almost like fragments of their thinking. So it's hard to explain, but I think of a kid who, it was May when he finished his first book. And he used to come to class and he'd be about 70 pages into a book. and we would be doing like theme notebooks that day. And so he'd try to tell you about the theme of a book, but it's a really, whoa, sorry, went to screensaver. It's a really incomplete understanding of what the theme of that book is. And this is a kid who's used to kind of parroting whatever other kids are saying. So sometimes it would feel like he had kind of BS'd his way through an understanding of what's going on in that book. And so what I find is that it's not that different than the kind of low engaged kids that you see in English class, except that in my mind, they're on a trajectory. I talk to kids about, you're going to move along this continuum this year. And if you're starting the year, I do not read, and I'm trying to get you to, I read all the time, there are going to be places along the way. So let's say that right now you are, I will read occasionally, but not every day. Then talk to me about that. And the key here is that if you've got a reluctant kid, your job one is to get a book in their hands that they want to read. And it is going to be easy to give up because some kids take a really long time. But I will tell you right now, I have about 85 students that are mine this semester. I've got every single one of them reading. Every single kid in the class has read at least 2 books as the end of the first quarter. And most have read 4, 5, 8. I've got kids who've read 12, 15 books. So there's a range, but it can be done if you are taking it seriously enough. You know, you got 4 or 5 kids at your bookshelf at the start of class, and instead of conferring with all those kids you want to, you take the time to say, let me talk to you about some of these books. Let's find a book that might be a good fit for you today. Why don't you give this book a try? They know that you care, they know you're committed, and they're going to start making that gain. So anything you can do to make reading pleasurable, not horrible. And lastly, the Lit Circle question. Harvey Daniels says he wishes he could take back that first book with the roll sheets because they were used, like everybody hated them for so long and they weren't really what he intended. But this is what I did last year. I set up a 3rd quarter challenge, and I said, I want all of you to read a full-length book of nonfiction because probably 70-80% of my students had never done that. And I gave them, I wheeled this card in, and it probably had 30 different titles, anything I could find that I had 2 or 3 copies of, and some of them I had 7 or 8 copies of. And then we did this big browsing where over several days, I book talked all of these books, so 7 or 8 of them a day, and would then pile them on tables and have them get their hands on them, look at them, the covers, talk to other kids, because the idea was you're going to select a book with some other kids to read. And what amazed me were the number of kids who chose books that I thought were wicked hard, like Unbroken, which I still haven't finished, but it's huge, and it's World War II, and it's action-packed, but the boys who chose that, some of my general level, lowest level readers chose that book and persisted with that book. That's what's incredible. But what's different about like particular roles and all is my Lit Circles were set up so you guys gather, and the first job is to create a schedule. And so we were about a week out of February break when I started this, and they had to plan over February break. So I had groups that said we are not reading a single day during February break, and I had kids who said I want to do most of the reading over February break. And they decided as a group, these are the pages we all agree to have read by this day. That investment, that student choice is huge. I had a boy that I'm going to be talking about next week at NCTE who was in a Lit Circle group for Unbroken, and it was just incredibly hard for him. He read it in all of March, all of April, and most of May to finish that book. The rest of the group finished by the end of March. So what he would do on the days when the group was meeting, and they knew he was trying, he just didn't have the stamina to read as much as they were reading. So he would meet with them for the first few minutes, and then he would go and read more. And he loved it. He felt included. He's in a class, it's 10th, 11th, 12th graders mixed together. So he felt like, what he was doing was important, and they were all engaged in the book. But they were very willing to let him continue to read at his own pace. And I think that was hugely important for him as a reader, because when he finished that book, they did this whole clapping thing for him, and he was so proud. I have this amazing picture of him standing next to his tower of books. So I'm going to put that on Twitter later so that you'll know it's just for you. But the key with lit circles for me is have the students made a commitment to the book, and then the beautiful thing as a teacher is when lit circles meet, you're wandering. So I spend that entire period of time with my notebook in hand, listening to conversations, taking notes on what I hear so that I can slip those under the doc camera and say to the class, these are the kinds of things I heard. This is so smart. This is the way you really analyze what's happening here. I could hear this group doing this. And talk about these different books. Not only does it generate a lot of engagement and interest from the kids in these other titles that they didn't really plan on reading, but it allows them to get feedback from you on the dynamics of the group and how things are going without, I guess you don't have to do it right there in the moment. You don't have to interrupt their great group conversation. And as you can expect, I had some groups that didn't talk well together, but they would learn from those group share times at the end how better to engage each other. Like if your group really struggled today, maybe you want to go home tonight and come up with a couple questions. Sometimes I would direct that with mark a passage that you think is worth talking about, or right now in the back wall of my classroom, it's book graffiti wall, and they've all put quotes from the independent reading books they're reading all over the wall back there, and they're amazing. They make me want to read all kinds of books. But so choose a quote tonight that says something to you that you think is important that this book is about. That kind of stuff can really spring them to take ownership of where the conversation goes. Thanks. I wish we could have done this live. Apologize for my schedule this year, but my Wednesday night class, wow, I'm learning a ton. So thanks, you guys. You're going to be great teachers. Bye.